Something in your kiss just told me my sometime is now. Everybody finds somebody someplace. There's no telling where love may appear. Something in my heart keeps saying my someplace is here. If I had it in my power, I'd arrange for every girl to have your charm. Then every minute, every hour, every boy would find what I found in your arms. Everybody loves somebody sometime. And although my dream was overdue, your love made it well worth waiting for someone like you. If I had it in my power, I would arrange for every girl to have your charm. Every boy would find what I found in your arms. Everybody loves somebody sometime. And although my dream was overdue, your love made it well worth waiting for someone like you. Everybody loves somebody sometime.
Well, welcome to you all. Welcome to the service for Olga today. My name is Isla Tooth and I'm a funeral celebrant. First of all, my apologies to those of you who must be outside the chapel, but I'm hoping that the sound is all good and you can still see and hear everything that's going on. Just a couple of things to tell you. After the service, you're all invited to go to the Skyline Lounge for something to eat and drink and an opportunity to spend some more time sharing some stories and memories of Olga. Now, the Skyline Lounges are just kind of over the hill to the right of the car park, so it's not far to walk, but if anyone needs help, we have got a golf buggy that will get you there. And at the end of the service, we will all be leaving the chapel by these side doors here, okay? Oh, the other thing I need to tell you is that at the end of the service, Olga's coffin is just remaining here in place. I'm leaving the curtains open, so if any of you feel like you'd like to come and have a moment at her coffin to say your own goodbye before you leave, you'd be very welcome to do so, okay? Thank you. Olga Abram. We're all here very much to honour her life, to mourn her death, and finally to farewell her body for cremation. Olga died on the 27th of January at the age of 90. She was the widow of Frank. She was a mother to Sylvia, Sandy and Pina. She was a grandmother to Sebastian and Damon and to Nick, Ollie and Georgie. She's survived by her sister Vida and the extended family, both here and in Slovenia. There's also significant family in Melbourne, and I know some of you have travelled to be here today, and I know Sandy and Daniel will be particularly pleased that some of you have really made the effort to be here with them to farewell Olga. Olga, of course, also leaves friends and neighbours and a network of people whose lives she touched in important ways on her journey through life. So again, particularly on behalf of the immediate family, my thanks to all of you for being here today. And it is such a difficult day for you all. It's such a tumultuous time when we must face the death of someone that we've loved, someone that we've cared about. Some of us find any major change in life difficult. And the death of someone that we've cared about, well, that's just the greatest change and the greatest challenge that we ever have to deal with in life. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by it for a time. There are writers whose work helps us to make sense of this turmoil. Some of you might know Sophie Laguna's books. She's actually a fiction writer, but I recently read a short piece by her where she wrote about the recent deaths of her favourite musicians, people whose music she'd grown up with. She speaks quite simply but thoughtfully about her sense of loss, and I think her words can speak to us all. So let me quote. "We can't change the shape of life. Lives, all lives, end. Our heroes must go along the road alone. They must leave us, and we must mourn and face the road ourselves. There is no other way that we have learnt. Love of life is bittersweet because it changes. But perhaps the impermanence of life is the very thing that makes it beautiful. Death teaches us what matters. Death is what explains life to us. What a strange and thorny contradiction." Today, I think we are very aware of that contradiction. We are in this place to honour and celebrate Olga's life, so there will be moments of joy attached with both the simple pleasure of being alive and to the special memories and the love and affection that you shared with Olga. There may also be the tears and the sadness and the great sense of loss. And perhaps some of that loss will be attached not just to Olga, but also to other family and friends who've died. It's often what happens in attending a funeral. You think of those others who've been special to each of you. And there might also be some sadness for those less tangible things that perhaps we have all lost in this last year. We are here, we have made it to this point, to be able to gather, to reconnect through your shared connection with Olga. It's so important to have this opportunity to come together to publicly acknowledge grief and loss and the joy in living. And of course, it's so important to come together to share stories, to share memories, because this is very much the way to be honouring Olga's life and your part in her life. So our chief storyteller today is her daughter Sandy. So I'd like to welcome Sandy to give the eulogy that she's prepared for her mother. Thanks, Sandy.
There's so much love in this room. Thank you. I grew up listening to Mum play Dean Martin records, along with most of the old crooners, but she loved Dean Martin the most. So much so that if I had been a boy, she would have called me Dean. So Mum, the Dean Martin song was for you. My mum was amazing. She was one of the most kind, generous and patient people I have ever known, and I am so lucky and so proud that I could call this wonderful woman my mum. She was courageous, strong, determined, and that much overused word nowadays, resilient. And for all of you with Ravo connections, boy did my mum have a lot of grit. She was warm, funny, cheeky. She was intelligent, curious, savvy, never wasteful. She was ever so warm, welcoming, compassionate, accepting. I could go on and on, but I know that I am not telling you anything you don't already know about my beautiful mum. And to be honest with you, these words have been used by many of you when you have spoken to me about my mum. I know you all had different connections with Mum, but it didn't matter if you had known her most of your life or had just met her. She had such a kind, caring and compassionate demeanour that you couldn't help but instantly warm to her. So as much as this is hard for me to stand here today, I guess it's the perfect time to tell you a little bit about her life and perhaps a few things you may not know about my mum. She was born on the 13th of April 1930 in a small town in Slovenia called Kobjeglava. Her father was a builder and loved playing cards and bocce with his mates. I get the sense he was strict but kind. Mum was one of 8, so her dear mum had the enormous task of dealing with everything else that had to happen with a family of that size. Mum adored her mother. She was a gentle soul, kind, caring, never a harsh word. And if I thought my mum was patient, my nonna was next level. I sadly only got to meet her once on a trip back to Slovenia when I was 8, and it was only for a few days. We bumbled along as best we could with the language barrier, Mum forever translating, but I could tell even at that young age that she was a very special person. Life wasn't easy for anyone back then, but with so many siblings, you made your own fun, and there was always someone to help you get up to mischief. Mum loved to make people laugh, and I think she may have been a little bit cheeky, but always with a big smile, so I don't think anyone could ever get cross at her, and if they did, couldn't stay cross for long. And I know that even as a young girl, although she didn't have a lot of things, she always kept her part of her shared bedroom clean, neat and tidy, something that never left her. Mum was 9 when World War II broke out. She didn't talk very much about those days, as I think she found it very difficult. The few bits of information she did manage to share was that the schools had to teach in Italian, so they learnt Slovenian in secret from the priest, and they had German soldiers living on their property. I can't even begin to imagine what that time was like for an adult, let alone a child. She started working at 11, expected to tend to the animals and do whatever was needed at home. In her late teens, she worked for the railway and together with a friend was trained in signalling. It was a very responsible role, but the shifts were long, 12 hours, and they were in the middle of nowhere and it wasn't safe, so she left to find something else. Next was a job in a doll factory, about 3 kilometres from home, that she would ride to and from on her bicycle. She was a hard worker and it wasn't long before she was promoted to a supervisory role. But after a year or so, the factory went out of business, so it was time to find something else. Ever since Mum started earning her own money, she loved to be well dressed and have her hair done. She told me she and her friends used to paint their nails, but they only had the polish, no brushes, so they used to use chicken feathers to apply it. At 23, she went to Trieste to nanny for a family and looked after a little boy and girl whom she adored and they her. The husband was strict, only allowing her a few hours of free time on the weekend and wouldn't allow her to even listen to the radio if it was in Slovenian. Only Italian was acceptable. She didn't seem to mind too much as they were kind and was so sorry when she left them to come to Australia. She left Trieste on the 19th of October 1954 and travelled by train to Genoa, a trip that took a full day and night. From there she boarded a ship to begin the month-long journey to Australia, where her sister Vida and brother-in-law Ben were already settled. She talks so fondly of that journey. I think it was one of the happiest times in her life, and she did it 2 more times, but that first trip was the most special. She arrived in Sydney on a lovely sunny day like today and was met by Ben, who together with Vida helped her settle into a new and very different life a long way from home. She could speak Slovenian and Italian, but no English, so these early days were challenging. But my mum, determined as ever, over time taught herself English by listening to the radio and watching TV, and just never gave up. The following year, she married Joseph, my father, whom she knew from Slovenia and had travelled on the same ship to Australia. A year later, my sister Sylvia was born. These were such happy times for my mum, despite the language barrier and being so far from home. My parents worked so hard and in no time bought their first home. Mum already loved Australia and her new life so full of opportunities, and on the 5th of April 1963, she became an Australian citizen. I came along in '68, a surprise baby, but things were not going well in their marriage, and for the safety of her girls and herself, Mum had no option but to leave the family home and the marriage and try to rebuild her life. Such a courageous move for any mother, and true to her character, she never gave up. These were difficult times, but my mum was so strong and so determined to give Sylvia and I a good life, a safe life. A few years later, she met Frank, and after much deliberation, decided to move to his farm in Arcadia, one of the best decisions she ever made. My sister was already married, so it was just Mum and I, and soon after, Frank's daughter Pina joined us as well. Growing flowers is not easy work. Long hours, 7 days a week, and you are at the mercy of the weather. But even though it was hard work, she loved living in Arcadia. It was a lovely community, and they had lovely neighbours, a few of which Mum still kept in contact with. Each year, Mum and Frank made sure they took time off in the winter, which is the quieter season for flower growers, and would travel back to Italy and Slovenia to visit family, as well as always exploring somewhere new. They were both curious and loved to travel, so Mum had very fond memories of these trips. She was so happy when I married Daniel, and I always chuckle when I think of our wedding day and my mum and Daniel's dad, Andrew, at our reception, taking a conga line through the kitchen. Mum and Frank adored Penny and Andrew, and they loved getting together with all of the Bacons whenever they could. Even when Daniel and I were living overseas, if Penny and Andrew ever travelled up to Sydney, they would try and visit them at the farm. Very funny dinners with endless conversation, delicious food, Frank's homemade wine, and way too much grappa. They even joined the Bacons for a family wedding in Bali and Melbourne for Christmas. Very special memories for everyone. With us now living overseas, it was a great chance for them to visit somewhere new, and we took great delight in showing them around. One of our trips through Italy and Slovenia was a bit like a lampoon holiday, with mishaps, laughter, and a 2-week-long game of Chinese whispers, with Mum and I translating from Slovenian to Italian for Frank and to English for Daniel. They timed their trip to the US perfectly for Nick's arrival, and they also came to Switzerland not long after Ollie was born. By the time we were back in Australia for Georgie's first birthday, they had stopped their overseas travel. Glad to have us home again, they looked forward to our visits, overfeeding us until we couldn't move, and overfilling our car with fresh produce and flowers. Gosh, we miss those visits. The year after we returned home to Australia, life took another sad turn, with the tragic death of Mum's oldest grandson, Sebastian. 3 years later, Sylvia also tragically passed away. Yet although my mum's heart was breaking, she still managed to be kind and patient. I'm still in awe of how she managed to get through those dark days, stay strong, and just keep going. As they got older, living on the farm in Arcadia was becoming a bit tricky. Mum didn't drive, never had, so when Frank stopped driving at 88, they were forced to make some tough decisions. After looking at a lot of retirement and aged care homes, we just couldn't find anything that was even close to suiting them. That's when Daniel suggested we renovate our home and include a granny flat for them to move into. They loved the idea. Sadly, Frank passed away before we finished. This was such a hard time for my mum. She had nursed Frank in his ill health right up until he passed away. She was so sad without him, her partner for over 40 years. She stayed on at the farm for another year and then moved into her new home with us in Pymble for another new chapter in her long life. Understandably, it took us all a while to settle and find our rhythms, but Mum was always so respectful of boundaries. It was mutual, so it just worked. She loved having her own little garden and veggie patch to potter in. An incredible green thumb, we had a selection of fresh produce in no time. Recently, she even inherited one of our chickens, and to see the pair of them together in the garden was the cutest thing. Rosie, our dog, was another frequent visitor down to Mum, who had an endless supply of dog treats at the ready. She loved being a part of our family and watching Nick, Ollie and Georgie grow up, always keen to know what they were up to in their busy lives. She loved cooking for us, as most nonnas do, and would lovingly make her famous sugo, which of late would take her 2 days to prepare. Yet she was still cooking right till the end. She always made a huge batch so we could freeze it for those days when I was too busy or tired to cook. We are going to miss this meal so much, and already do. And even though she has given me the recipe and had Georgie make it with her, I just know mine will never taste the same or be as good. She loved meeting our friends, and you all so kindly included her in things which she was so grateful for. She loved her new neighbours, and it didn't take long for them to become her friends. You couldn't help but like my mum. She loved her gentle carers, both in Arcadia and here in Pymble, and both called Gail. You were so very special to my mum, and I can't thank either of you enough for all you did for her and me, and the friendship that grew between you. And she loved calling people and keeping in touch. We would often hear her nattering away in various languages and then come up the hall to share news from family or friends here and overseas, smiling with delight at having connected. She had always maintained a close bond with her family in Slovenia, and even though her siblings over there had now passed away, she was still very close to her nieces. These phone calls meant the world to her. The last few years were not easy, but the last year or so was particularly hard on Mum and us as we watched her health decline. She was ever so grateful for all the care and love we were able to give her, and I couldn't have done any of this without the incredible support and patience of my beautiful husband, Daniel, my gorgeous children, Nick, Ollie and Georgie, my caring Melbourne family, along with a lot of hand-holding from my dear friends, a lot of yoga, and a dedicated team of medical carers. Mum delighted in telling people she had an orchestra of doctors looking after her. She was so thankful for the care she received. As her health declined, it was so difficult to watch her go about her days in so much discomfort. I must admit, we did have a few practice runs leading up to today, but as much as anyone can prepare for the loss of a loved one, we are never really ready to say goodbye to a parent. Fortunately, we had the luxury of being able to say what we needed. There was time to say thank you to each other, to say how much we loved and cared for each other, and to let her know how much she will be missed. And as Nick said, nothing was left unsaid. Mum said she didn't want us to be sad. She had had a long life, and although at times challenging, a good life. She had been lucky to see so much of the world. She had come from humble beginnings, but had worked hard her whole life, finally retiring at 75. She was proud of what she had achieved in her life and what she had provided for her family, because family was everything. And even though life kept throwing her curveballs, each time she picked herself up, sometimes a little slower than the time before, but she kept her chin up and she kept going. And despite all the heartache, she still managed to see the good in people, went out of her way to help whenever she could, and just tried to be the best person she could be. She told us to be patient and kind and do everything now while we still have our health. Now is the time, she would say. She told everyone, don't get old. But most importantly, she would want me to remind you all to be kind to each other. I love you. Moja zlata mama.
Thank you, Sandy. And now I'd like to welcome Pina to just say a few words. Thanks, Pina.
Thanks. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And as you know, I'm Pina. And I'd like to thank you for being here today to celebrate the life of this remarkable woman. And as Sandy mentioned, we came together as a family when I was 12 years old. So Olga was my second mother. I was extremely lucky and am grateful to have had her guiding me through my early life, particularly with regard to education, to work, to deportment and financial choices during a very turbulent time in my life. As a mum, she was always on call to discuss my personal and social issues. She always took a bipartisan approach regarding my decisions, whatever they were. Olga was more than a stepmom. She was my best buddy on the farm for many, many, many years. Even when she travelled with Frank, my father, I was given the privilege of running the flower farm. She was so honest and very kind. Despite all the hardships and disagreements with my father, there was never any doubt we made a great team with respect to decision making. I can see that some of you know she sacrificed a lot. I will miss her dearly. I will miss her dearly. In my small, humble world, she left a huge legacy. This was driven by her beliefs in kindness and support, not only to her family, but friendships as well. And I can see and understand why this chapel is so full today. Thank you all once again for supporting our family today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pina. Well, you'll be sharing your own stories and tributes fairly soon over a cup of tea, but our next tribute comes from Gigi Bacon, and she's going to sing for us. She's going to sing the beautiful Ave Maria. So welcome, Gigi. Thank you, Gigi. The reading for Olga's service today comes from the English writer Louis de Bernier. It's called When the Time Comes. When the time comes, it is better that death be welcome, as an old friend who embraces and forgives, Seize advantage of what little time is left. And if imagination serves, if strength endures, if memory lives, ponder on those vanished loves, those jesting faces. Take once more their hands and press them to your cheek. Think of you and them as young again, as running in the fields, as drinking wine and laughing. And if you wish, let there be Spanish music, Greek seas and French sun, the hills of Ireland if you love them, some other place if that should please, some other music more suited to your taste. Consider, if you can, that soon you'll shed this weariness, this pain, the heaped upon indignities, and afterwards, who knows? Perhaps you'll walk with angels, should angels be, by fresher meadows, unfamiliar streams. You may find that those who did not love you do so now, that those who loved you did so more than you believed. You may go on to better lives and other worlds. You may meet God directly or disguised. You may, on the other hand, who knows, just wander off to sleep, that seamless, dreamless, unimaginable sleep. Do not be bitter. No world lasts forever. You who travelled like Odysseus, this is Ithaca, your destination. This your last adventure. Here is my hand, the living to the dying. For some of you, this might be a time for a prayer, and I'm sure you might offer a prayer quietly for yourself. But for Olga now, I would like to offer words of gratitude for her life. We are thankful for Olga's life and the blessing of love and care that she brought to her family and friends. We are thankful for her warmth and friendship. We are thankful for her kindness, loyalty, and generosity of spirit. We are thankful for her nurture through all the food she lovingly prepared. We are thankful for her cheekiness and her capacity for humour. We are thankful for the quiet strength that she showed in adversity. We are thankful for Olga's life, and we will miss her dearly. We seek peace for Olga in whatever form her journey may now take. We seek peace for her family and friends as they journey with grief and healing. Deep peace to you. Deep peace to you. It is time for me to say the farewell for Olga now, so I would ask you all to stand, please, while I say this. Thank you. Today, you're all very aware that your last gift to Olga is remembrance, and that something of her is journeying on with you, something of her is woven into each of your lives and is part of who you are. There's the love and affection you shared, the qualities you admired, the values you'll carry with you in her memory. I'd like to close her service with a simple poem from M.D. Hughes. The tide recedes, but leaves behind bright seashells on the sand. The sun goes down, but gentle warmth still lingers on the land. The music stops, and yet it lingers on in sweet refrain. For every joy that passes, something beautiful remains. Thank you. Now, remember, if any of you would like to have a moment at Olga's coffin before you leave the chapel to say your own goodbye, you're very welcome to do so. Thank you.
It's knowing that your door is always open and your path is free to walk. That makes me tend to leave my sleeping bag rolled up and stashed behind your couch. And it's knowing I'm not shackled by forgotten words and bonds and the ink stains that have dried up on some lines. It keeps you in the back roads by the rivers of my memory. Keeps you ever gentle on my mind. It's not clinging to the rocks and ivy planted on the columns now that binds me, or something that somebody said because they thought we fit together walking. It's just knowing that the world will not be cursing nor forgiving when I walk along some railroad track and find moving on the back roads by the rivers of my memory, and for hours you're just gentle on my mind. I dip my cup of soup back from the gurgling, crackling cauldron in some train yarn. My beard a roughened coal pile and a dirty hat pulled low across my face. Cupped hands round a tin can, I pretend I'll hold you to my breast and find that you're waving from the back road by the river of my memory, ever smiling, ever gentle on my mind.